Okay, in this video we'll talk briefly about setting up accounts, as I said in the last video. Another thing we'll talk about very briefly is the EOS.BIOS smart contract, which you need to load in order to do smart contract development after you get your Node EOS set up. I haven't decided if I'm going to do like an in-depth video on like what that code looks like. I think what I'll do is I'll release the course, and then if I get enough people interested, pinging me, saying, hey, I'd really like to know what's in this EOSIO, the EOSIO.BIOS smart contract, then I'll, go through and dive into the code and we'll talk about it more in detail. But for right now, we'll just kind of like assume that it's the secret sauce, I guess you could say. Back in the docs, you'll see here they say that this BIOS contract is what handles resource allocation, RAM, staking, all that stuff. So there are usually a lot of questions in the Telegram because, like, since you're deploying the EOS BIOS contract yourself on your local net, you typically don't have any problems, right? Because you have complete control over all the parameters. If you want to tweak stuff, you can do that at will, give yourself more RAM. You also have control over the EOSIO permission locally, EOSIO account locally, so you can delegate bandwidth all you want on your local net. But this is not the case on the main net, right? Because the block producers are controlling that account. Anyway, long story short, we'll deploy this here on. Actually, we could do that right now. So let me fire up Node EOS. And then simply run this command right here, right? So we'll go into so I'm in my software projects. The EOS is the repo I pulled down, and then in build contracts, there is the EOSIO.BIOS smart contract is built here. So we just need to deploy this smart contract, and the way you do that, let's just run the command for now, and then we'll talk briefly about what these parameters are. Whoops, I'm in the wrong directory. Go up to so this is generally how you deploy smart contracts. I probably should have gone into the account creation process before this, but we'll talk about it after. I kind of segued quickly because I briefly talked about the EOSIO.BIOS contract, so I figured, what the hell, let's just deploy it. So what's going on here is you have CLEOS. Obviously, we've been using CLEOS for a couple of videos now, and there's no surprise there. Well, CLEOS is a command set contract. So what all we're doing here is setting a contract, and then we're giving the contract a name, in this case EOSIO. So you'll see here, somewhere in the documentation, they give you, oh, maybe they don't. Anyway, actually what we could do is CLEOS set contract, and you'll see it fails, and it gives you, essentially what it's expecting to get from you. In this case, we're creating the account which the contract is going to live on, in this case EOSIO. Then we pass it the contract directory. This contract's already been built whenever we ran make install in the first video, and then we have to sign this action with the EOSIO permissions. So now this contract is living on the blockchain. This EOS.BIOS contract is living on the blockchain, and you can see, or you should be able to see, where it got deployed. So I guess they must have removed that. It used to be that you could see the console output whenever you deployed a smart contract. Oh, you know what? Now that I think about it, in the Telegram you have to pass Node EOS specific flags, I believe, in order to see the console output, either Node EOS or CLEOS. I'll dig into that in some other video in the future, but for now just assume like the smart contract did in fact get deployed. So that's generally how you deploy smart contracts. Like I said, I kind of skipped over account creation, so we can talk about that right now, actually. So if we go back to my CLEOS wallet, I still have that default wallet, and if I do CLEOS wallet keys. We'll see the public key that I created previously, right? Well, in order to create accounts, you need to have that private key up here. I believe they do account creation somewhere in this documentation. Right here at the very bottom. So if we run this command, EOS create account, what you're doing here is, let's EOS create account, EOSIO, and then the name of the account, and in this case they decided to call it user, and then the public key for that account. So now we have an account on the EOS blockchain, my local blockchain, called user. And similarly to how when we deployed the EOSIO .bios smart contract, we had to, in this case, we have to have an account creator. In this case, it's EOSIO is delegating RAM to the, which, sorry, I'm again jumping ahead a little bit. We'll talk in depth about like RAM, CPU, all that stuff, because that comes up quite often. But just know that when you create a user on the EOSIO blockchain, you need to have a little bit of RAM, which means you need to have a little bit of EOS. In this case, the EOSIO account comes preloaded with a whole boatload of EOS whenever we spin up Node EOS locally. Since we have control of this EOSIO account, we're able to delegate RAM to create this user essentially, and this user is using this public key, which it can do because we've imported the private key matched up with this public key. So anytime we're dealing with this user account, our KioSD wallet knows how to sign transactions associated with it. So whenever we create this account and we pass in this public key, KioSD will go, oh great, I know how to sign transactions. I'll just assume it's almost like a mapping from this user, this account name user gets kind of mapped into the public key and therefore the private key. So anytime you want to do anything, you can just say, hey, assume that you can sign this essentially, because KioSD knows it can sign it. Like we did over here, right? I passed the -P flag and then EOSIO. Well, since we already have the EOSIO public-private key pair for this blockchain, all I need to do is pass P and it will do all the signing for me. I don't need to do any magic key stuff, right? I don't need to copy paste a big long string or anything like that. From here on out, anytime I need to sign anything at all, I can deal strictly with user. I can strictly patch this -P user once it's imported into my wallet, which it is at this point. So what we'll do, I'm assuming, what we'll do here is we'll create yet another account, and this time we'll call this account tester. So now we have two accounts on the EOSIO blockchain, and in this case we can print those out using the public key as shown in this command. So we'll run this command, and oh, I'm using the wrong they even tell you in the documentation, don't use this public key because this isn't the one you generated. And here I am doing it. So now if we run it, we'll see those two account names, tester and user, and we have complete control over those account names henceforth on my local copy of the EOSIO blockchain. So in the next video, I think what we'll do, so kind of as you can probably tell in these videos, I'm just kind of going through their tutorials for now. What I want to do is go through the tutorials, give us a good base for the understanding of how everything works together, and then later we'll talk about more advanced concepts. We'll talk about a high-level overview of what's really going on. We'll deep dive on the supplied Block 1 smart contracts. We'll also talk about EOSJS in order to build like front-end GUI stuff or Node.js applications. But we really need to go through this documentation. We really need to go through these tutorials in order to have a shared understanding of like when we talk about wallets and all these other things. So I'll just continue going through that. It looks like we have maybe 6 or 7 more different little tutorials that we'll go through, and then we'll start hitting it hard with more advanced stuff. So in the next video, we'll probably deploy the token contract, and I'm assuming we'll transfer tokens between this user and tester account. I'll see you in the next video for that.